Last week, we deep dived into The Girl Next Door, pinned to the barracks wall. But as the 1940s faded into the rearview mirror, the American fantasy got a lot more interesting. It got sharper. It got darker. It got a pair of blunt cut bangs and a smile that could jumpstart a stalled V8. My friends, welcome to the era of Bettie Page. Behind the Bangs, the eternal mystery of Bettie Page. If the pinups of the war were about hope, Bettie was about freedom. She is the primordial godmother of the rockabilly scene, a woman who lived a life that was half Hollywood dream and half Nashville grit. Before she was an icon, she was just a girl from Tennessee who knew how to sew a straight line and command a room. Ghost in the Polka-Dot Bikini. Close your eyes and breathe in the salt air of Coney Island in 1950. The boardwalk is a high-voltage junk show of flashing lights, the smell of fried dough, and the rhythmic crashing of the Atlantic. Amidst the crowd of post-war families and sailors on leave, a young woman with jet black hair and a smile that could jumpstart a heart is walking the shoreline. She isn't a Hollywood starlet with a clandestine studio contract. She's just a girl from Nashville with a camera and a sense of freedom that the academic world of the time wasn't ready to categorize. This was Bettie Page, and while she didn't know it yet, her image was about to be battened down on every locker door from Brooklyn to Berlin, sparking a revolution that would change the American psyche forever. The roots of a rebel. To understand the woman behind the bangs, we have to travel back to the humid hills of Nashville, Tennessee. Long before she was a pinup queen, Bettie was an academic standout. She was a girl who actually read the textbooks, eventually earning a degree from George Peabody College with the intent of becoming a teacher. Yeah, you heard me. She had a degree. She intended on teaching. She was sharp, articulate, and driven. Qualities that often made the junk show of 1940s gender roles feel like a cage. Bettie married her high school sweetheart, but the relationship quickly started taking on water, proving that a traditional landfall wasn't in the cards for her. After her divorce, Bettie made a break for the coast, eventually landing in San Francisco and then New York City. She wasn't looking to scuttle the moral compass of the nation. She was just trying to find a harbor where she could be herself. She worked as a secretary, taking shorthand and filing papers, living a clandestine life in a cramped apartment. It was during a casual walk on the beach that a police officer named Jerry Tibbs spotted Bettie. He wasn't looking to make an arrest. Actually, he was an amateur photographer who saw something atavistic in her smile. He gave her her first portfolio, and the engine of her career was officially jump-started. The Camera Club Underground. In the 1950s, the world of pinup photography was a clandestine network of camera clubs. These weren't the big-budget studio sets of Los Angeles. These were small, gritty rooms where amateur photographers paid a few bucks for the chance to shoot the next big thing. Bettie absolutely thrived in this environment because she brought a high-low mix of Southern charm and unabashed playfulness to every session. She wasn't just posing. She was telling a story in every frame. Whether she was wrestling with a jungle cat in a leopard print swimsuit or simply winking at the lens, she possessed a natural joy that made the viewer feel like they were part of the joke. This was the era of the girl next door, and the Rat Pack couldn't get enough of her. She worked with legendary photographers like Bunny Yeager and Irving Klaw, moving from standard pinups into the high-voltage world of fetish and bondage art. For Betty, it was all an academic exercise in modeling. She didn't see the clandestine darkness that others projected onto it. To her, she was just a girl in a costume, playing a part to keep the ship shipshape and the bills paid. However, the outside world was beginning to take notice, and the winds of a political gale was starting to howl. The scuttling of an icon. By 1955, Bettie Page was the most famous woman you weren't supposed to know about. She actually had more pictures published than Marilyn Monroe. However, the clandestine nature of her work, it just couldn't stay hidden forever. Senator Estes Kefauver, a man who loved a good junk show in front of the cameras and apparently had issues with spicy content, began a high-voltage investigation into juvenile delinquency. He believed that obscene materials, this includes Betty's bondage photos, were scuttling the moral fiber of American youth. Suddenly, the girl who just wanted to be a teacher was being hauled into the academic and legal crosshairs of the United States Senate. The pressure was immense. Irving Klaw, the man who had distributed most of Betty's work, was actually forced to destroy his negatives, and the entire industry was battened down under a cloud of pure fear. Betty, ever the survivor, didn't fight the system with a loud protest. She did something much, much more unforeseeable. She began to distance herself from the lens. The whole junk show of the hearing had really soured her on the industry. She began to seek a different kind of harbor, one that wouldn't lead to a courtroom. This is when she started attending church and looking for a way to completely scuttle the Bettie Page persona for good. The Vanishing Act. The year 1957 marked a permanent landfall for Betty's career. On the heels of a final high-voltage photo session that many now refer to as her final Valentine to fans, she simply vanished. There was no press release, no farewell tour, and no big deal with a studio. She walked away from the lights, the cameras, and the fame at the absolute peak of her beauty. For 30 years, the world would have no idea where Bettie Page was. She became a ghost in a polka-dot bikini, a mystery that grew more high voltage with every passing decade. While the Rat Pack was deep diving into her old photos, Betty was living a life that was far from shiny side up. She moved to Florida and then back to Nashville, and eventually on to California. She struggled with poverty, mental health issues, and a series of marriages that all eventually hit the rocks. She was a clandestine figure in her own life, living in tiny apartments and working odd jobs, all while her image was being jump-started as a cult icon by a whole new generation of fans. She actually refused to be photographed as she got older, wanting the world to remember the atavistic beauty of the girl on the beach, the girl with a smile, not the weary, worn-down woman she felt she had become. The Rediscovery and the Legacy. In the late 1980s and early 90s, the ship finally made landfall again. A new generation of fans, artists, designers, and history buffs alike rediscovered Betty. Her bangs were back in style, and her don't care attitude was the blueprint for a new era of female empowerment. Betty, now an older woman living in a clandestine retirement home, was stunned to find out she was more famous now than ever. Finally, she emerged from the mist, though she did still refuse to be on camera, preferring to do audio interviews that revealed her still sharp academic mind and her signature Nashville drawl. Bettie Page passed away in 2008, but the ship she launched hasn't stopped sailing yet. She remains the ultimate atavistic icon, a woman who was simultaneously innocent and high voltage, a secretary who became a queen, and a ghost who never truly left us. She proved that you could walk away from the junk show of fame and still leave a mark that can't be erased. She battened down the hatches on her own terms, and for that, she will always be the captain of the pinup world. Myth versus reality. Myth. Bettie Page was discovered by a high-end fashion photographer. Reality. She was actually stopped on the Coney Island boardwalk by an off-duty police officer and amateur photographer named Jerry Tibbs. It was a total junk show beginning that led to her first portfolio. Myth. Betty retired because she was canceled by the government. Reality. While the Senate hearings were high voltage pressure, Betty's departure was a personal clandestine pivot towards her religious faith. She simply decided the voyage was over. Myth. Betty was the highest paid model of the 1950s. Reality. Despite her fame, she was often scuttled by bad contracts and rarely saw the profits from her images until much later in life. Warning of voyages to come. As we prepare to drop anchor on this voyage, take a moment to look at the shoreline that we've traveled. Bettie Page was a woman who mastered the art of the Vanishing Act to save her own spirit. But next week, we're going to look at a very different kind of story. One where there was no escape and no clandestine harbor to be found. We're moving from the 1950s to a humid Houston night in 2002, where a high-voltage betrayal led to a narrative disaster that the world will never forget. It's the story of a woman who didn't vanish, but instead made a landfall in a hotel parking lot that scuttled her life and the lives of everyone around her. You won't want to miss the grit and the salt of that deep dive. Before you head out, make sure the ship is shipshape, subscribe to the channel, and ring that notification bell so you're the first to know when we weigh anchor on our next saga. Until next time, keep the heavy side down, but not too far down. And as always, be good to each other.